Well, welcome everyone. This is the second in our series of the Rash Cowan Lectures this academic year, 2021-2022. And we're very pleased today to have Dr. Brett Barbanel, who is the Director of Research at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, at the International Gaming Institute. She's an assistant professor at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas, and also in the Harrah College of Hospitality. She's also a research affiliate at the University of Sydney in Australia. Brett spends her time digging into the world of gaming and gambling, asking questions about esports and video game technology, individuals' behavior and policy. She's an active gamer herself, reaching top 5% Hearthstone Battlegrounds rank last season. So she knows firsthand experience what she's talking about. And her biggest gambling win dates to the mid 2000s when she actually won her husband at a poker game. So we're really pleased to have Brett with us. She's a university professor who's presented in dozens of countries worldwide on subjects of gambling, gaming, and everything in between. She works with policymakers, and she's here to challenge you today with questions about gambling and giving you quintessential university experience. She'll build your propensity to wonder, and then fill you with a healthy dose of rigorous skepticism. The title of Brett's talk today is The Evolution of Chance in Video Games and Esports. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Brett Barbanel.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to make one small correction to my bio, lest there be concerns about human trafficking. I actually picked up my husband at a poker game. I didn't win him.
Okay, sorry, Brett.
And let's get started. How are we on the screen share, Jeff?
We're perfect.
Excellent. When you look around, gambling and risk-taking seem to be everywhere. New casinos expansions abound. Here in North America, sports betting has invaded our lives. Jamie Foxx, JB Smoove, Patton Oswalt, they're all showing up every day. But what about the other ways gambling, risk-taking, and uncertainty might exist? When you play a board game, do you roll a die? What about when you pull cards off the top of a deck? When you watch sports, do they flip a coin at the beginning of the game? How about marriage? I first started thinking about how gambling kept showing up in life in different ways about 15 years ago. I was playing World of Warcraft at the time, in the Burning Crusade days before Activision swooped in and changed the face of Blizzard. I was an enhancement shaman. I'd hang out in my amazing Fists of Molten Fury and my brand new shoulder plates with these blue flames rising out of them. And around that same time, there was a new feature released in the game. Some characters could create something called the Mysterious Fortune card. You could buy unused cards from the game's auction house, where the average purchase price was about 150 gold. And for reference, the game money was silver and gold. There were about 100 silver to every 1 gold. And when you used the Mysterious Fortune card, it read you your fortune, and it gave you in-game money that ranged from 10 silver to 5,000 gold. Well, this piqued my interest. To me, this isn't just a fortune teller, it's a lottery ticket. But then I stopped myself. It's a fortune card, right? I had immediately thought of this as gambling. When I look around, everything I see is gambling. But I spend all my time thinking about gambling. What might somebody else think about this Mysterious Fortune card? Do you think of this as gambling? But is your lens also colored? When you look around, Do gambling and risk taking seem to be everywhere? And are there other instances of this in life? As it turns out, many of our most familiar activities, especially those that we think of as games and sport, use elements of gambling. And depending on how you define gambling, you could make the case that you gamble in almost any decision that you make. But you think about gambling differently than the person, well, virtually sitting next to you. You think about it differently than I do. The nature and nurture that brought you to the point where you are today influences that lens through which you view the world. You think about gambling differently because you don't see things as they are, you see them as you are. And that's the theme I want you to consider today as we go through a myriad of different ways in which gambling and gaming have been intersecting, with a particular focus, of course, on video games and esports. And when you sign off today, I hope you'll walk away inspired to change the way you think about gambling and risk taking. So to get to that point, first, we'll talk briefly about this gambling and gaming thing. Then we'll cover some of the ways that you define gambling in your own individual and social perspectives. Next, we'll cover the legal side of things. How is gambling defined under the law? And why is that definition important when we think about gambling, video games, and esports? We'll then go through several examples of this confluence of concepts and what it all means, not just for you, but for others. And I very much want to emphasize for those in the audience for whom gambling and/or gaming imagery is a trigger, that almost this entire talk consists of gambling or gaming imagery, and I do not want to be triggering any harm, so please be aware. If that means you have to drop out, I completely understand, but please be aware that that is on the way. So let's talk about these two things together. From social casino games to esports to virtual reality, in-game payments, many familiar activities, especially those that have really started booming. So much of the nearly 2 past years have been time at home in front of screens. These use elements of gaming and gambling. And in the most prolific example, so big that it got its own lecture in the Resh Cohen series last month, loot boxes still hit the news on what feels like a near daily basis in international legislative and regulatory debates, as well as clearly still being a subject of major importance in the research and treatment space. The video games and esports industries have grown and continue to grow exponentially since COVID showed up in our lives. Esports quickly jumped the ranks at sports books as popular events for betting. Even prior to the pandemic, video game live streaming became a viable career choice for many folks. Skill-based gambling machines appear on the casino floor. The latest I've seen, for example, is a claw game reminiscent of your old school arcade, or possibly even current arcade, depending where you live. Crypto gambling has developed out of the intersection of online games and cryptocurrency and other blockchain platforms. Investing in the stock market finally got its day in the media sun, spurred on by broad access through things like the gamified Robinhood app. As sports betting grows across North America, we see increasingly gamified wagers and promotions taking place. And all of this, of course, means that we start seeing these terms of gaming and gambling start to intersect in pretty interesting ways. So here, a little bit of disambiguation. When I use the two terms that you see on the screen here, I'm talking about two different activities. This first one, gaming, is in reference to games in which the outcomes are determined predominantly by skill. So today, I'm mainly referring to digital and/or video games. And the second term here, gambling, is in reference to games in which outcomes are determined, whether predominantly or entirely, by chance. So betting, casino games, table games with cards like blackjack and poker, and in which there is an opportunity to win something of value. Neither of these two activities is inherently beneficial, nor is it inherently harmful. And they both can have both positive and negative consequences. And the contemporary use of digital gaming as a vehicle for gambling is a somewhat relatively recent development in the human condition and our use of language. And combined with this ever increasing mainstream acceptance of gaming and gambling as a pastime, which of course then brings us to the key question of this talk. Is it gambling? So from a social perspective, what's gambling? Let's start with this. Gambling is risking something of value on an outcome that is uncertain. Well, that's fairly broad. It could include almost anything that you do in life. So then would any kind of risk-taking be considered gambling? Let's start with a pretty common situation. The moment you walk outside your door, you get in your car, you head to the grocery store. You walk through the doors and you grab the essentials, eggs for me, right? Bread, maybe you eat that as well. Definitely the chocolate chip cookies that are sitting at the bakery and always have that nice waft coming off of them. Was any of this scenario gambling? What did you risk when you walked out the door to your house? What did you risk when you were driving in your car? Are you gambling on your health with the sugar content of those chocolate chip cookies, which I think we can now all assume are long gone into your digestive system? And was the gamble there worth it? If you see gambling everywhere, do you see any of those things? This is generally a gambling-focused audience. This is a talk in a NCPG and Center for Gambling Research sponsored series. So you probably see things like casino games, dice, slots, etc. And that makes sense. That's how gambling is typically presented. And it's largely a product of how society legally defines gambling. And that legal definition is really what sets out a more established and standardized basis for what is and what isn't gambling. Now, the legal bit is much more structured, and we can see a bit of how personal interpretation crops up in these structural characteristics. Typically, gambling law centers around three main elements: the cost to participate, the element of chance, and the prize that one might win or lose. Gambling rules all around the world engage these three items in some capacity in how they decide what constitutes gambling. So as we go through these, think about them differently. How might these elements of gambling be interpreted differently by different people, backgrounds, interests, perspectives? If you're a Gen Z or even a Gen Alpha gamer, for example, you might think of these concepts differently than, say, a millennial university professor or a Gen X problem gambling clinician. So let's start with that first item, the cost to participate. It's exactly what it sounds like. What do you have to ante up to be part of the game? In legal definitions, the cost to participate usually means something of what you see here on the screen: money or money's worth. Has to have a monetary value. And what is money's worth to you? It's probably different than what money's worth is to me. It's probably different from what the person who's virtually sitting next to you considers to be of monetary value. If you'll recall the adage, one man's trash is another man's treasure. But if what you're risking in a bet can be exchanged for money, that's a cost to participate when we define legal gambling. And the next element here is chance. Another way of thinking about chance is the idea of randomness. And I want you to think about that for a moment, all on its own, just randomness. Because chance is not something that's exclusive to legal gambling definition. It's also present in so many of the things that we do. And it's been present in games, not just gambling, for almost as long as games have existed. Why did dice have pips instead of Arabic numerals? It's because we've been using dice or rolling the bones, as it were, to apply chance to games since before Arabic numerals even came about. Think about the card games you may have played, gin rummy, hearts, solitaire. Chance shows up when you pull the next card off the top of the deck. And even the famous children's game Candyland involves chance. What color will you get on the card you pick to move forward and get to King Candy's castle before your opponent? And finally, in this legal definition, is prize. Just like the cost to participate, we're typically talking about money or money's worth. And remember, what is that value to you? Do you measure value in your life with money? Do you measure it with time? Do you have kids? Maybe you measure it by the amount of energy you have to expend for a certain activity. Maybe you measure it that way without kids. How about something as simple as social rank? For example, if you put a leaderboard on a game, does that assign a social prize? Think about an arcade game at your local pizza joint or maybe at your pub in the 80s, 90s, perhaps even today. You drop a coin into the machine and you wrestle with the joystick. And you try and maneuver Ms. Pac-Man through the maze to eat all the dots and capture the cherries. And when the ghosts get too close, you get really nervous and straight a little, but you persevere and you get that high score. And you enter your initials, and there you sat at the top of the leaderboard above all those greasy fingered schmendricks busy stuffing a pepperoni slice down the hatch. That feeling, that social rank, could that be something that you value? Is that a potential prize? And this is particularly important when it comes to defining gambling, especially from a legal perspective. That value that you place on an item is often the crux of the difference between what's legally determined as gambling and what isn't. So let's return to this intersection here. And this concept that gaming and esports are in some ways now a vehicle for a gambling-like presence. Is any sort of randomization in a game chance? Is that a game of chance by social standards or legal standards? Is one a subset of the other? So the question then becomes not just what is gambling, but what is the line and where do we draw it? And who's in charge of drawing that line? We'll recall our Talmudic philosophical levity here for a moment. We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. So let's keep that frame of reference in mind as we start to look at how chance, that core piece of defining gambling, shows up in video gaming and esports. Because sometimes that gambling presence is obvious, and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it starts to skirt the line of what's legal and what's not. And at other times it's perfectly legal, but it ends up perhaps displaying gambling imagery to an underage audience. At other times it's totally on the up and up, and it's just good, plain, random fun. And we're going to look at three main pieces of this today. First, we'll cover gameplay and activities that are at least directly or peripherally related to playing games. Then we'll look at things in the spectatorship category and how we start to see gambling showing up in different ways people watch and consume video games, esports, and gambling, particularly online. And then finally, we'll look at the future, a future that's actually already manifesting today. And as I go through this, I want to remind you that this is by no means an exhaustive list of concepts. We only have an hour today, and frankly, even less than that, because we've left time for Q&A. If there's something that you think I've missed, please let me know. I'm always switching things up here. So this is one of the most direct examples we can see when we talk about gambling in video games. And that is just the presence of gambling imagery in these in-game environments. And gambling imagery and sometimes in-game play has been around for quite a while. The image that you see here is a slot machine in Borderlands 2, which was launched in 2012. By the time we got to Borderlands 3 in 2019, they had added the not so tongue-in-cheek loot boxer slot machine. We can see this in other games as well. Roulette appears in Grand Theft Auto. This is GTA San Andreas. And what's interesting about this piece is that the odds increase as you level up your gambling skill. And your gambling skill is leveled up by playing the game. And so it's not necessarily teaching the lessons of how a game might actually work, though it does clearly look like gambling. We can also see it in much bigger games. This game is Star Wars: The Old Republic. I captured the screenshot in 2019, so it's still somewhat recent. But if you think about it, it's not unusual to see in this incredible imagery, right? This is just one section of one city, an entire planet, an entire galaxy of the game of Star Wars: The Old Republic. And this is a casino. If you zoom in, this is always really tough to do in a virtual setting, but here you can see this hospitality droid, who is an NPC or non-player character that you can interact with. And he is a casino cashier. And these are games that you can sit down at and play. And it's actually not so odd to think about casinos showing up in a game that's based on Star Wars, because gambling has been present in Star Wars almost since we started watching the movies, right? Lando Calrissian lost the Millennium Falcon to Han Solo in a bet. And so this is, again, it's continuing some of that gambling presence, but it is showing up in this game that many are playing, including a wide variety of age groups and backgrounds. Let's move on to something a little more recently. Oh, good, it did load. Oh, it's a good thing. Something fairly straightforward. Here's an advertisement for Riot Games Teamfight Tactics when they released the Galaxy set. This was actually a little while ago, I'd say about a year and a half ago now, in 2020. This specific ad, as you can probably guess from the language on the screen, is aimed at Korean gamers. Also, apparently, Millennial University professors targeted ad spots on YouTube because this is how I found it last year. This is for Teamfight Tactics, as I've mentioned. This is a video game that typically you would play on your computer. And this ad is for when they released also the mobile client, so you can play on your smartphone as well. There's all sorts of the normal aspects of a video game that show up here. Strategy, there's cool colors and images, right? The graphics are really impressive. There's fun avatars like the Pengu here on the screen. There's social interaction with the people that you're competing against. There's a chat box there for you to talk to them as you play. And there's also some chance in this game. You can roll with a random number generator to shop for the champions that you'll put onto your team for the gameplay. Well, roll with a random number generator, huh? It sounds quite a bit like potential gambling, but does that constitute gambling? Maybe, of course, it depends on how you define gambling. But check out how they think of this, right? Look at what appears later in this advertisement. I'm going to press play now. You may want to turn your volume down. Sometimes this feeds back very, very loudly, much more loudly than voices, just as an alert to everyone.
승능보를 얼마나 TFT 모바일 도동동작 또로로로 갤럭시 도동동작 TFT 모바일 도동동작 또로로로 갤럭시 도동동작 허우와 날라다타 여기 갤럭시 너의 자식 얼럭키다 너의 투네 그래서 타지 않아 21세기 이 전략 이래 전략 나는 널 등지 터차미 롤 아재 롤린 이도 롤린 인겨들 잘게 누나 막았다마 회가 초밥 뒤집개로 뒤집어라 레디 셋 TFT 모바일 도동동작 또로로로 갤럭시 도동동작 TFT 모바일 도동동작 또로로로 갤럭시 도동동작 멋이 도동동작 TFT 모바일 도동동작 5, 6월 서리 가득 찰로 동작 또로로로 갤럭시 도동동작 하다 현타 도동동작 TFT 갤럭시 도동동작 유체 뉴 시너지 전설전자 멋이 패치 우주 도동동작 리그 오브 레전드 전략 게임 TFT 모바일 도동동작.
So the imagery that's here, it's showing you elements of things that you might think about when you think about gambling. So things like rolling, the big unlucky element of this, the slot machine that hopefully you didn't miss at the end of this advertisement. All of this contributes to some of that imagery, but the game itself is that gambling. You are rolling for chance, but again, what's the cost to participate? What's the prize to be won or lost in this game? There we go. And speaking of rolling with a random number generator, this is an interesting one because it's gambling amongst the players themselves in a player-generated gambling type game and an MMORPG. This is massively multiplayer online role-playing game. Everyone will call it MMORPG. You don't have to say the whole thing out. It's far too long and a mouthful. But this is using the in-game currency that can almost never leave the game itself. And it's done in the chat box, which is why I call it here chat gambling. Players will collect, usually in a certain area within the game itself, and they'll use certain in-game commands in the chat box to create a gambling game. An in-game command, for example, might be something like a /dance. And if you type that into the chat box, your character will dance. For this chat gambling game, it's usually something like /roll or /dice. And that command randomly generates a number, say between 1 and 100, that is revealed in chat. So a casino boss, if you will, might post into the general chat. If you roll between 1 and 50, you lose. If you roll between 51 and 100, you're a winner. The image that I've chosen here is a game that came out about a month and a half ago, a little bit more perhaps. No, about 2 months ago now. It's Amazon's new MMORPG, New World. And the command here is dice, which rolls a die, and it reveals a number 1 through 6. And people are reporting that different servers with an MMORPG, you usually have many different servers because typically one can't hold the player load. And they have these designated casino areas where people are going and posting up risk or posting the amount they'd like to risk, and then playing this dice game in the chat. This isn't something that's created by the game or created by the game developer. It's the player community that's driving this kind of activity. They're gambling on the roll of a die with currency or items that are only inside the game. And this sort of gambling in MMORPGs, it isn't new. It was popular in World of Warcraft, where it wasn't new. You can go all the way back to EverQuest, which really was the first MMORPG, definitely the first in the West, to find gambling-esque activities in chat like this. And clearly, it's still continuing to this day. And speaking of things that are particularly relevant in this day, what kind of games and esports researcher would I be if I didn't talk about NFTs in November of 2021? And if you can't tell, I'm extremely excited about this part of the talk. I've been talking about NFTs for a few years, and finally, I would say about the last 10 months or so, people are finally interested in this subject, which is very exciting for outcasts, isn't it? So what is an NFT? This is something you may have heard the buzzword all over the place now. I just saw a headline this morning that said Google is reporting that NFT searches are up well over 100% in the last month even. So NFTs are non-fungible tokens. You can think of this in terms of like cryptocurrency and blockchain. A non-fungible token means that you can't exchange one NFT for another. They run on a blockchain network. There's a digital ledger that records all sorts of transactions similar to cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. By comparison here, Bitcoin is a fungible token. So Bitcoin that I might own is the exact same as a Bitcoin that Jeff might own. It's just registered as owned by each of us. With an NFT, Jeff and I might own the same art NFT, but they're not fungible, right? They can't be swapped out. Jeff's NFT is distinct in its classification and meta information from mine. So they're unique and they can't be replicated. Each one accrues value independently. Generally, they derive their value based on how scarce they are. So let's say that art NFT that Jeff and I both own, there was a limited release. There's only 2,000 of them in the entire world. and I own number 1947, and Jeff owns number 3. Well, that also perhaps, and typically in art, plays a role in the value of that item. Jeff's 3 out of 2000 art will generally be driven to higher value than my 1947 out of 2000 piece of NFT art. NFTs are stored in digital wallets. They're collector's items. One of the best ways to visualize this is exactly what I've been describing here. It says art, right? It's a verified token that has unique ownership. You can't just copy paste the item. If you copy paste the item, you have a copy, right? And it's almost like a forgery. It's not like sending a JPEG through your email. There's a ledger that records who owns it. There's an example I like to give. NBA, which is really one of the first that brought this into popular knowledge and pop culture, partnered with Dapper Labs, which is a blockchain company that does quite a lot of NFTs. And these NFTs are called NBA Top Shot. They're recorded moments from NBA games, so clips. So you might download a clip, but if you own NBA Top Shot, you own the official record of that clip. So if I, for example, own an NFT of my favorite WNBA player right now, the ultra badass Sabrina Ionescu from the New York Liberty, netting a 3-pointer this past summer. You may have heard of things like CryptoPunks, which are digital NFT art, or music albums that are being sold as NFTs, or perhaps my absolute favorite of all the NFT applications. In March, Charmin sold NFTPs. That's right, it is the virtual version of your favorite roll of toilet paper. The NFTP art was sold at auction to benefit charity. This was, again, a bit tongue-in-cheek, similar to that the loot box slot machine that I showed you. But again, this is art, right? That's being sold. This image here that you see, this is not an NFT. This is a copy in my presentation here. But beyond art, as particularly relevant here today, NFTs have one of the most popular use cases in gaming. And I will not go too in depth on the many different applications of NFTs in gaming. I'm happy to discuss that another time. Today, I'm going to particularly focus on NFTs in gaming and gambling. So the image that you see here comes from a particular example in the NFT world, and one that relates to this evolution of gambling and gaming discussion. This is the WAX platform, the Worldwide Asset Exchange, where you can, according to them, create, buy, sell, and trade physical and virtual items to anyone, anywhere in the world. And I've picked this specific example because the WAX Exchange is also the original home of VGO skins. These are NFT skins that were specifically created going back to about 2017, when traditional video game skins were restricted in trades. Oops, apologies. Something up here. So when Valve, for example, this is the biggest example of the skins betting, had decided to put a limit on trading. So once you traded a skin from a Valve game like Counter-Strike Global Offensive, there was a 7-day cooldown before you could trade it again, which put, I wouldn't say an elimination, but certainly a crimp in the plans of people who used the skins for gambling purposes. And VGO skins came out almost immediately after. Because they're NFTs, they are uniquely owned by you and not by the game developer. They also had that selling point where the game developer couldn't just shut it down one day and take away your skins. You own it. You can use it then to trade and sell and use as gambling fodder. So this is somewhat akin to a paradox of sort of which came first, right? Chicken or egg. Here we have on one side, right, Valve's Counter-Strike Global Offensive, a game that created a specific currency to foster an in-game economy that was then used for gambling. And then on the other side, we have VGO skins, which is a currency that was created really for use in gambling. And now it's in search of a game. They are still skins that can be used in video games. So this is the kind of thing that's set up as a blockchain platform to facilitate digital goods marketplaces. This can be something like the video game skins trading, but also can be for more general digital goods. And WAX in particular is also one of the major platforms that's trying to wend its way into the developing metaverse, everybody's favorite buzzword. Please stay tuned. We will get to that. And here's another really interesting example of something that builds on the foundations of games, blockchain, and cryptocurrency, and digs into that confluence of gaming and the use of chance when cash games could be present. This is Crypto Fights. It's from a company called Fix Gaming, F-Y-X, Fix. Crypto Fights, it's a turn-based, as you can kind of see here, 1v1 single-player fantasy game. And the selling point here is you use strategy, logic, and probability to win. Ah, there it is, right? Probability, you may be thinking. That sounds like chance, doesn't it? Now, this chance, as in the elements of chance that have been part of games since we started rolling dice, or is this chance like gambling? For each turn, again, this is turn-based, a die is rolled. You roll for initiative to see who goes first. You roll for attack, how do you hit your opponent? And you roll for damage. How hard do you hit them? These are all pretty standard RNG functions in games, but they are present here. They all help you determine whether or not you'll win. The games are powered by the Bitcoin SV blockchain, so all moves and matches are publicly auditable. And when you win, it may bring with it loot. These are in-game items that are also NFTs. Experience points, or XP, you can level up your character, and potentially cash rewards. These cash rewards come from cash tournaments. You buy in with Bitcoin SV, which is a cryptocurrency, and the reward is cash. The loot that you might win, these are, again, NFTs. They can be sold and traded on a marketplace. I'll note this is still in production. The marketplace is not up yet, but these can be done for cash, as you can see here on the screen. So they also then have partnered with different companies to create NFTs that can be used in this game. If you own an NFT with Fix Gaming, they partner, for example, with different comic book producers. So Zenescope, who creates like the Grimm fairy tales and Van Helsing comic books. They have in-game NFTs of these Zenescope characters. So you can own this NFT and bring it into the game and play as that character. And it really shows this sort of intermerging of different elements. It's much more fluid than a lot of the things that we've thought of as distinct products, or perhaps distinct gambling or gaming products in the past. So then as we move from how we play to how we watch, how does this then engage an evolution in gambling elements? We can start with the most obvious of crossovers here, the esports book. This is a company called Rivalry. I've picked them here primarily as an example because I like their Spaceballs 2 reference here, but really because this is a gambling hub that was built specifically with the gaming community in mind. It uses content, language, imagery here that's reminiscent and makes you recall games much more than gambling. Here you can see the traditional book. You can bet on games like that you can watch. So League of Legends, Rainbow Six, CSGO, Call of Duty Global Offensive, and others, much like you'd see football or hockey in a traditional sports book. Of particular note too, you can see up here at the top, this company also created their own gambling game called Rush Lane. And it's interesting, it's a mix of video game imagery, it's a racing game, and gambling. In essence, you're assigned one of the racers in the game when you buy in with your wager. And it's really just a VLT with a racing game skin on it. So how then are people watching the games that they're betting on? This is what one of those streaming platforms looks like, how they watch the games. I've picked Twitch here, though I could just have easily have picked Douyu, Huya, YouTube. But again, we only have an hour with time for Q&A. So here's a screenshot of what a spectator sees when they watch someone playing games. This is streamer Chocobars, and she is playing Minecraft. As you can see here, there's different options. You can follow, subscribe, you can just watch without being logged in. There are some benefits to things like a subscription. You're able to then skip advertising that they might show in the middle of gameplay. It's sort of like paying for like ad-free streaming on Hulu is a way of thinking about it. As a subscriber, you also tend to have more interaction with the streamer. They might read your name on the stream, for example, or they'll answer questions in chat. Maybe they'll have subscriber only chat, so you can only interact if you are subscribing to this stream. There are also certain gambling like mechanisms that can go into this chat box, which is the main source of communication when you're streaming these games, such as this example that I've captured here with an Apex Legends streamer. The streamer can set up tools, and these are usually through third parties, that keep people engaged. Remember, when people are streaming, it's still a human being on the other side of the computer, right? They can't always be on. Let's say they stream for 10 hours at a time, which is not a crazy long streaming period. That's quite the normal range. And at some point, they have to get up for a break. I mean, at some point, all of us, right? We have to get up and pee at some point in our lives. Streamers have to do that too. So how do they keep people on their channel when they have to get up and do that? Think about back in the day when we used to have channels on television and an advertisement would come on and you'd have to flip through the channels to find something else so you don't have to watch all those advertisements, right? Similar situation here. If you're not being actively entertained, you might end up going somewhere else. Even something like a downtime between games, when you're waiting for the new game to load. There's all these different add-ons and extensions that third parties have created that a streamer can use to keep their audience engaged. And some of them include these gambling-esque commands. For example, here's an obvious one. You can see I'll zoom in a bit here. The chat command is !slot. The number afterwards is the amount bet. And the outcome is a little mechanism that you see here that looks like a slot reel outcome. And as you can see, we won quite a bit of points. And these points, well, they aren't worth anything monetary, but they could be worth something socially. Maybe giveaways, raffles, awards from the streamers. Maybe I could pick the next song that's played on stream using some of my points. So is this gambling? It says slot in the image and it looks like a slot, but these fabulous 50,000 points that I've won here, they aren't actually worth anything. Or are they? And that's really where we get into that fluid understanding or misconceptions that might exist in the space. And here's a game space gambling concept that launched 1,000 streams, gambling streams. Twitch currently has around 150 channels offering live broadcast of real money slots, the most popular of which regularly receive over 100,000 views. And slot streaming channels really came to the forefront of popular gaming media around the past 6 months or so, with some really well-known streamers wagering huge sums of money. And there was immediately criticism from other streamers calling these hosted slot sites things like sketchy or ethically ambiguous. And one streamer eventually even ended his slots games and went back to video games, specifically stating that he was concerned he was addicted to gambling. And he apologized to exposing his audience, which included underage viewers, to gambling. And these channels pose pretty serious questions for how we think about the spectating of real money gambling and for understanding really who's consuming and engaging with this kind of media content. And a particular shout out here to Dr. Luke Clark and his lab at UBC, who have kindly allowed me and my colleague from University of Sydney, Mark Johnson, to tag along on some of the research work that's underway in this space now, looking at the way that people interact with slot streams and respond to the streaming and viewing of gambling play. And I want to identify a few little interesting responsible gambling elements of this too. First, in the bottom left-hand corner here, you see this !aware. This is a chat command. And in the upper right-hand corner, a gamble aware note. Here's that gamble aware note that shows up on the stream. Again, these are not gambling operators. These are streamers. This is not their site, but they have included this information. And then when you put in the command !aware, this is what pops up. This is a bot. Streamlabs is one of those third-party providers that I mentioned who offer add-ons. So when you type !aware, it shows this information to you automatically. And what's particularly interesting about this streamer too is that this URL at the bottom, this is a big colorful PDF that they themselves have created with just a huge list of international resources for problem gambling. So if you live in Nevada, it'll have the Nevada information. It will also have the National Council on Problem Gambling information. If you live in Poland, it will have information about resources in Poland. And that's what's at this URL. And I find this particularly interesting. Again, this is something that they've chosen to do. And finally, we have arrived at today's future. That's right, my friends, gird your loins for fall 2021's sexiest buzzword, the metaverse. So first things first, what is the metaverse? Right? You're in for an academic's absolute favorite answer. It depends. We don't really know what the metaverse will look like yet because it's still under development. There's plenty of different ways that folks have shown what they think a metaverse might look like. Definitely the most prolific of this has been Facebook rebranding as Meta, this parent company, and then showing us the many ways that we can live our office life all the time now. But depending on who you talk to, you're going to get completely different answers about what it is and what it means. So for the next 10 minutes or less, here's the Brett Abarbanel answer. One way to think about the metaverse is just sort of this increasing permeability of the borders between different digital environments and our physical world. So imagine putting on a headset and stepping into a cyber world like this one. The metaverse is this space where you can interact with virtual objects in real life, active with real-time information. So for example, you could walk around a virtual Las Vegas strip populated actively with real-time information about everybody else who's physically on the Las Vegas strip. You can see digital depictions of real life places and buildings. You can visit, a great example that I've seen is you can visit a virtual Apple store to browse and buy digital depictions of Apple products that are then delivered to you at your real life physical home. The days of people camping out to test and buy the latest iPhone could be over because now you can do it from the comfort of your own home in your VR headset and feel that tactile element that people so crave. Whole mini industries have evolved and exist already around and in these virtual metaverse worlds. People are paid in the real world to create virtual products in Minecraft. The image that you see here, this is the Electric Daisy Carnival Las Vegas, one of the world's largest music festivals. Here you see it in Roblox, a games platform in the metaverse just last month. This is from October 2021. Millions of people participate in events that happen only in these metaverse environments. Remember in December 2019, when one of the trailers for Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, it aired only in Fortnite. And so this is something that's really been evolving for quite a while. And it's easy to suggest that people spend so much time in these worlds because they are so engaging and the products are so well programmed and designed to keep you there and entertained. But it's even more than that at this point. It's that people are also interacting, they're creating things, and they're entertaining each other. It's a player and consumer-driven space as well. And as the experience economy researchers, Pine and Gilmore, have said, this is one of my favorite quotes these days, commodities are fungible, goods are tangible, services are intangible, and experiences are memorable. And that's a big part of what a metaverse is likely to tap into as it continues to develop. It's about creating new experiences. And as you can probably guess from the examples that I've given here, video game companies are some of the leaders in the development of the metaverse. I mentioned Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite, Epic Games, which makes Fortnite. They just raised $1 billion with a B dollars from investors to build their metaverse. And since the metaverse is still a work in progress, we're also seeing a variety of different characteristics pop up, right? Some are centralized. So for example, they're underneath the control of one central overhead which looks like what kind of the Facebook metaverse might look like. Some are decentralized, which means that control is spread across nodes in a distributed network. And then there's other interrelated elements and issues with dual and perhaps even gray areas. So things like an open versus closed web, things like having a major identity or remaining anonymous, things like control versus freedom. And of course, it wouldn't be this talk if I didn't focus in on the gambling developments in the metaverse space. I'm going to be limited here in examples for time purposes, but perhaps Jeff, the next Rash Cohen lecture series could feature a metaverse specific lecture. Here's one example of a casino in Decentraland, which is a decentralized open metaverse on the Ethereum blockchain. As you can see from the big red letters here on the screen, this is the Atari Casino. You may remember Atari from the days of Pong, or maybe the Atari VCS and its whopping 128 bytes of RAM. Well, it's now 2021, and they have a metaverse casino. It sits in the casino quarter of Vegas City on Decentraland, and users can play casino games like the blackjack that you see in the background here, or the roulette that might be present. And these use cryptocurrency in the gameplay. They have a DJ set here on the right, bottom right that you can see. And they had a metaverse concert. A DJ came in and using VR and AR, they held a concert where somebody was able to have everybody party together in this casino and also in their own homes. Here's another example of a casino in Decentraland. This is Tominoya. You can see the slots and the table games here on either side of the cherry blossom. This casino actually also acts as an NFT art broker. So as you walk through the casino, you can see displays of art around the facility, much like you would in an art gallery. And what makes Tominoya unique at this point is that rather than kind of set up bots, like you might in a, say, think of the Star Wars Old Republic example where there's an NPC or non-player character, this casino has actually hired real life employees to sit in the metaverse and to be customer service in this casino. They explain some of the tasks like placing a bet or how to play roulette, slightly more complex ones perhaps, like how do you load cryptocurrency into your digital wallet? And it's the addition of that human interaction in this highly digital space that creates the more memorable experience. So what now? Why does this even matter? For years, it's been this highly debated discussion in the design world, right? On form versus function, art versus design. What designers think people do versus what they actually do. And so this is the image that particularly depicts this quite well. And when we take it to our world, the game developers, the spectator engagement tool creators, metaverse casino operators, putting these things together may not actually realize the potential legal and social ramifications of even just adding a simple random number generator to their games, or even just gambling-like elements. When game developers allowed skins to be traded between players, they probably weren't planning on a burgeoning multi-billion-dollar skins betting industry. But that did happen. And how we define gambling and where we see gambling starts to come into play. Because after all, humans take risks in their lives. And at the same time, risky behavior has the potential to lead to problematic behavior. And with gambling, we can't invoke the now immortal words of former US Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, who described his threshold test for identifying hardcore pornography as, "I shall not attempt to further define the kinds of materials, but I know it when I see it." So how does this then, how do we do outreach, right? How do we let people know where harm might exist in this world of opportunity? Is it done through the streamers? Is it done through the game developers? In Tominoya Casino in Decentraland, these real life hosts connect with players. Well, we know the power of human connection and offering support to those who experience harm. Can we tap into that here? We're in this uncharted space where gambling, gaming, technology as a whole overlap, but that Venn diagram isn't really a circle. And so as we went through each of these gambling-esque images and actual gambling, what did you see? Was gambling everywhere? Was there always a cost to participate? Was there always chance involved? Was there always a prize to be won or lost? And we come back to the original question here. Is it gambling, right? How does that gambling definition matter for your use? And with that, I will close and open up to questions. Briefly before I do, I would like to say thank you to and express my very, very deep gratitude to all of my colleagues and co-authors in this space, Mark Johnson, Marta Saligo, Ben Burrows, Joe Macy, Yuho Hamari, Luke Clark, Sam Leaf. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all the hard work that you do. My extreme gratitude to Dr. Derevensky, NCPG, and McGill for inviting me to be part of this lecture series. And with that, I would love to do questions. Jeff, I believe you are muted.
Brett, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you
Okay.
now.
Great. Well, thank you for your interesting and informative presentation. I guess I'd like to lead off with one quick question, and maybe it's not a quick answer. Well, given the fact that gaming has very few age restrictions and age prohibitions, what are the policy implications for looking at this migration between or the intersection between gaming and gambling?
That's a great question. It's one of the hardest that we ever discuss. I know you and I have talked about this many times over. And I think one of the biggest hurdles that we face is really in communication with the games industry. For many, many years, the games industry has really been under attack as kind of this leader into harm. And so these accusations have not always been the case. I mean, if you think about things like violence in video games, for decades, they've been attacked for creating violent children and violent future adults. I mean, even like the other day, right, in the United States, where we've got this huge media frenzy trial for Kyle Rittenhouse and for murder. And the prosecution is talking about, he has 300 confirmed kills in Call of Duty. And every video gamer and video game researcher is going, so what? That doesn't make a killer, right? There's so many other arguments that can be made in a case like this. And there's even research, it's taken decades, but now there's research that starts to show that this really isn't a cause of violence, right? There's violence that might eventually show up, but video games aren't causing it. And I give this example to show kind of the reason why a video game industry and a video game culture might be reluctant to listen to folks like us showing up and saying, hey, we think you're causing harm. Because for so many years, people did accuse them of that, and it ended up being not proven. And so I think there's a huge communication gap that exists here, and maybe it's just the angle that we've been taking. Maybe it's a matter of just getting an in, because for such a long time, these were really treated as very separate entities within the worlds that we live. And now it's so clear that they're not. They're very much interrelated. And I think that that's a big, big struggle that we've had. And until we kind of figure out how to communicate on these grounds, we'll continue to have.
Okay, thank you, Brett. So there are a couple other questions that people have raised. Can you talk a little bit about the meta universe and risk factors for neurodiverse folks?
So I saw that one, thank you. I'm actually not going to answer that one. I don't consider myself qualified, as I'm not a clinician or psychologist, and I don't want to provide an incorrect answer.
Okay.
If you email me, please email me. I'm happy to direct you toward those who do study this area and answer questions there.
Okay. One other quick question in regards to minorities, for example, Black women. Do you believe that the creation of this new metaverse will be more or less inclusive? And is there any role that gambling could play in enhancing or reducing social barriers for minorities?
What a fantastic question. I was not expecting this question at all. Yes, I'm incredibly hopeful for the role of the metaverse to be more inclusive. One of the neat things about the metaverse is you can be whomever you want to be. I could spend my entire life in the metaverse as a unicorn. And then maybe one day I want to be a pirate. So I switch and I'm a pirate. And nobody could ever know that this is what I actually look like. And so there's a way to completely remove some of the things that we can't change about ourselves from how we present ourselves in this world. And so our interaction is very much based on how we want to present ourselves and who we are. And so in many ways, we're removing some of those just long-standing things that have existed in both kind of humankind and human systems that have created this world in which we live, where we now have to really fight for inclusivity. That is something that's built in from the get-go in a metaverse. And your question about the role that gambling can play in enhancing or reducing social barriers, I'd like to think that it comes from that same element. This is a fantastic question. I haven't necessarily thought of the way that gambling can do this particularly. But I think that in how we create business, so gambling would be one, but all other businesses as well, have that ability to go from this completely open space. Every person who enters into the metaverse has that kind of same equal opportunity presence from the get-go. You are who you want to present yourself to be, and you act in the same capacity that anybody who enters in this space can act. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. I think that more broadly, I actually thought someone would ask about harm in the metaverse, but more broadly, I think there's also really neat opportunity to answer a question I've now created for myself, to have some of these harm prevention efforts and even clinical and therapy help in the metaverse itself, right? You can create an entire clinic and practice in this metaverse. You can integrate it in with a casino in a really impressive way that we just can't do in the real world. And I hope to see something like that as the space continues to develop.
That's great, Brett. We've out of time. I want to thank Shmita for helping organize and coordinating this session, the National Council on Problem Gambling, the Rush Cowan Foundation, our center at McGill. The next person who will be doing in this series is on February 24th. Dr. Henrietta Bowden-Jones will be talking about what's going on in the UK, and that'll be followed by Debbie LaPlante on March 24th. Debbie, many of you know, is at Cambridge Hospitals and also at Harvard. So we're looking forward to having everyone participate. Thank you again, Brett, for getting up a little earlier than most of us. And it's been a pleasure and very enlightening. Thank you very much.